We're going to go through what I'm calling the universal base project. Simply put, it's a way to set up and organize every project. It's a procedural approach and a system to do it every time, regardless of the project size. I can't stress this enough. It doesn't matter the size of the project. It can be adding captions to a 5-second clip, or it can be editing a feature film. This is how we set it up every single time. All right, so what are we going to be working on? We have been gifted some great footage from our friends over at a company called Larrabee, which is an educational platform doing some amazing things. You can go check them out at heylarrabee.com. So the overview for this specific task is going to be to create a video about how to knead dough in the process of making cinnamon buns. The video should have a primary takeaway and offer a helpful tip from the instructor. We're going to intercut interview footage with scenes from the actual lesson and B-roll of making the buns. We'll also need to add captions and reformat for 9:16. The total runtime should be around 2 to 3 minutes. And this is going to be, a quick turnaround. The first review date is 48 hours from now. And we have some notes here. It was filmed on 2 cameras, and B-cam was all shot off speed 48 frames per second. So it's sort of like creamy B-roll stuff. Again, this is a fairly typical project we might work on. Unscripted or interview-driven content, which we would then need to pull insights from and distill into a compelling video. Let me say that naming conventions is one of those things, it's one of those subjects where you can ask 100 people and get 100 different answers. And I would beg you to stop wasting time thinking about this and the optimal naming strategy and just go with what I'm about to lay out here. Not because I actually give a shit that you use this particular method, but because you will spend way too much time thinking about it otherwise. Sure, if a client has a specific naming convention, go with that. But otherwise, take a deep breath and just use this one. Okay, so first I want to break down a quick glossary of what we're talking about when we talk about naming conventions. We're going to see this in practice once we jump into an actual project, but just so we all get aligned, let's go through the glossary. First, MMDD stands for month and day. Client refers to the brand that you're doing this for. So this might be a main brand like Netflix or Nike, or it might be a sub-brand within the organization, but just think of it as your main client. The project title. This is a short identifier in regards to the overall project. So in our project example, this is going to be cinnamon buns because it's part of a larger series of videos about how to make cinnamon buns. The video name is specific to the deliverable and is essentially just a short video title. So in this case, it would be how to knead dough. I like to think of it as like a really short headline. How would we describe this to somebody who was about to watch the video? The specs are the video dimensions, but it's really just the aspect ratio. So 16:9, 9:16, 1:1, 4:5, etc. Stage. This references the stage of an edit. We're going to define these next, but it refers to what the stage in the process we're in, and we have numbers which correspond to each stage of the edit. Version. This is the version of an edit within a particular stage of the edit. So we might be in the assembly stage of an edit and on the 4th version of that particular sequence. We're going to dive into this more specifically, but we want to make different versions of different stages. And you can have an unlimited number of versions, whereas you're only going to have a specific amount of stages, 6 to be specific. Option. This is an alphabetic identifier to indicate slight variations between versions, like A, B, C, D. These are used generally to indicate singular differences between versions. I should also note that we only add them if they're applicable. Like, we don't always have to offer up an option in our naming convention, only when it applies to that specific sequence. Examples would be like sampling different music tracks, displaying different watermark placements, testing 2 different cold opens, etc. We use options frequently in the collaboration phase of a project when we're just like trying to fine tune and edit. Often they're used to like add contrast so that we can offer something up and get a client to react to it. Finally, only use dashes and decimals. We don't use underscores, we don't use plus signs, we don't use anything other than dashes and decimals to separate the different components of each name. The only caveat to that is you can use spaces in your video title. If it's basically like a sentence, you don't need to keep it connected. You can use spaces in between the words so that it's readable. How to name a project folder. MMDD-client-project title. So that's month, day, client, project title. How to name a project. This occurs when we save the project for the first time. This happens as soon as we start the project. We're saving our project file, month, day, client, project title, number. The number here just indicates the version of the project that we're in. So we only really do this in the case that we have a crash or we need to reopen a project and resave it. That's the only time we're really making a new project. We want to keep the same project or as minimal amount of versions of projects as we can. Stages of a sequence. Let's define the stages of a sequence here and assign them numbers. The numbers indicate the flow of a given edit, and all edits, big or small, fit within this flow. 0 is the sync stage. 1 is making selects. 2 is for string outs. 3 is for assembly or what I call the audio cut. 4 is for the first review cut. 5 is any sequence that exists within the review process or what I call the collaboration stage. That's where most of our time is spent. And 6 is anything that's getting delivered. Going to be more specific about these stages and give a breakdown of each stage, but the reason for identifying and labeling the stages of a sequence is twofold. One, it's a helpful communication device to signal to anyone on the team at a glance where we are in the process of getting through an edit. And two, it gives us the ability to add as many versions as we want to the specific stage of a sequence, and knowing how to version things out is a vital step to becoming a valuable editor. Versions. The version number is really for the editor. It's to be able to make as many different versions of a given edit as you want and to be able to jump back into the history of it. It's a non-destructive form of editing. We love versions. Make as many versions as you can. Options. Options indicate variations between versions. These are generally to indicate singular differences between versions. Think of it as an A/B test where you need feedback or you want to add contrast so that there can be, a decision that's made. And again, like a useful example would be like sampling different music tracks, displaying different watermark placements, testing different cold opens. We usually do this in the collaboration phase of a project. We wouldn't give an option if it was a substantially different video. Like say, you were taking an 8-minute video and cutting it down to 4 minutes, that would be two different versions. Yes, you could have an 8-minute version and a 4-minute version, but those are now two completely different videos. And these wouldn't be option A and option B. Using the same example, if you had two different 8-minute version videos, but one had an end card and the other didn't, that would be a situation where you'd want to add an option tag. How to name a sequence. Month, day, dash client, dash project title, dash video name, dash specs, dash stage, dot version. I want to spend a little extra time here because this is really important. What a lot of people do is they will use numbers at the end of the video name to distinguish the videos. So what this might look like is if we're making 3 different videos from one interview and you're getting 3 different talking points. So what you might have is interview clip -1, interview clip -2, interview clip -3. Or you might use A, B, C, A, B, C, D to basically separate the 3 distinct videos. And this is not a useful way of naming a video because it doesn't give whoever's viewing it or whoever's jumping into the project more context. It doesn't give them additional context to where the project is, what stage it's in, and it also doesn't help chronologically. And so the way that we're going to distinguish primarily in our naming convention between videos is not with numbers, but with the video name itself, giving it a little descriptor. Like I mentioned, it's like the headline. Let's just go back to that example of the interview clip -1, interview clip -2, interview clip -3. What these might become is interview clip -politics, interview clip -comedy, interview clip -history. Those are giving 3 distinct identifiers for each of those videos and the themes that they will sort of explore. And so then what we would do is we would tag the end of those with the stage the project is in. So maybe it's in the first review cut, right? So it would be all of those -4 and then dot whatever version you're working within. How to name an export folder. We go chronologically. So we go month, day, -number, and we start with 1. I have seen and I have used every possible type of label when it comes to an export folder. I've done R1 to indicate round 1. I've used V1 to indicate, version 1, V2, V3, ABC, the month, day, and year, the time of day. I've done all those things. And the reason that we're going to do it this way is because it's the most simple and straightforward. You might never need to use month, day, -2, -3, -4. You might only ever export once per day, but that's how we're labeling these, and we want to keep it chronological so that whoever's going in there knows what the last export is. The reason we do this is because it's really a signal, or it's really just a helpful way to have the next person who's going in there know what was the most recent export. So it's a way, it's a way to communicate asynchronously with the next person who goes in. 2 additional caveats. If we're rendering something out of After Effects or a graphics program, we're going to label it as GFX, because what will often happen is you'll render something out of After Effects and then you'll bring it into Premiere, like if it's lower thirds or their overlays or text graphics or something like that, and you want to have a differentiation for things that are getting exported and maybe getting sent to a client versus something that's getting exported and being brought back into the project. So for these, we'll label them as GFX and dash, a number. We also do not create a delivery folder for final, or like a finals folder, or label anything as final, not in a project folder at least, because we don't do this because we have other mechanisms for confirming that something has been delivered. The reason we don't do this is because we recognize that a project has the potential to be reopened and revisited at any point for all of eternity. And I understand that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. And so we use the most current version as our source of truth until we change it at some point down the line. The order of operations, think of this as, your pre-game routine. This is the procedure we're going to follow every time we're setting up a project. So in this order: 1, create a project folder. We're going to name it correctly, and then we're going to paste our project folder structure into it. 2, gather assets. Add them to their correct and corresponding folders and label them, chronologically. 3, create a new project folder. We've got to save it and name it correctly. 4, import your assets into the project. We're going to add them into their corresponding folders. 5, modify audio channels. This we can get into separately, but basically here we want to make sure that we have individual tracks of audio that we can, separate out and edit. 6, create a sequence and name it correctly. We've also got to make sure that the sequence matches the settings of the deliverable or the main piece of footage that we're working with to start. That's it. We'll go through this in greater detail now, but this is the exact order you should use each time you dive into a project. Let's look at our project folder structure. 1-exports is for exports and renders. This is also labeled as GFX. 2-assets is for footage, stills, music, shoot audio, fonts, branding, Photoshop files, etc. 1-audio is for anything that is strictly audio formatted, i.e., music, sound effects, shoot audio, voiceover, etc. 2-footage is for raw footage, clips, etc. 3-resource is for static assets that were given to us, as in, images, key art, title treatments, static graphic overlays, posters, fonts, documents, etc. 4-GFX is for motion graphics that were given to us. The key distinction in resource and GFX is that these are for things that we didn't create ourselves. They were either delivered to us or downloaded already pre-made. If we made them, they will live in the exports folder or as full project files, like Illustrator files, for instance, in the 3-project folder. 3-projects is for anything we create from scratch and has a saved project file associated with it. That would be like from Premiere Pro, After Effects, Photoshop, Illustrator, etc. Again, if we made a Photoshop project ourselves, we would save it here. If somebody gave us a Photoshop file, which we are not going to update or edit ourselves, it will go into the resource folder. All right, now that we have all that covered, let's actually start a project.